thought that being that we're coming to an end of Perek Kol HaBasar, and really we're coming to the end of the Taruvos component of Maseches Chulin, it's kedai to go back to a discussion that we began 2 short weeks ago, and that is the history of the kashrus of Coca-Cola. So we mentioned that in the early 1930s, there was a big tumult amongst the Rabbanim. How is it that Coca-Cola is being marketed, advertised, and sold as being kosher? The one thing everyone knew about Coca-Cola was that they were extremely secretive about their ingredients. Nobody knew what exactly was inside Coca-Cola. Well, if you don't know what's in Coca-Cola, how are you supposed to know that it's kosher? And the decision was made to reach out to a Lithuanian Rav who had moved to the United States of America. He was living in Atlanta, Georgia, which is the hometown, the corporate headquarters of Coca-Cola. He was a tremendous, tremendous Talmud Chacham. And they felt that he would be able to use his Torah knowledge and the fact that he was in close proximity to the powers that be of Coca-Cola to perhaps penetrate what was going on there and be able to come back with a conclusive decision. Is Coca-Cola kosher or is it not kosher? The name of that rabbi was Rabbi Tobias Geffen, Rav Tuvia Geffen, and we talked about how when he made his initial attempt to try to get in, he was completely shut down. But hashkacha through hashkacha, he had a friend who was general counsel of Coca-Cola at the time, a man by the name of Harold Hirsch, who, by the way, if you think about it, he was general counsel of Coca-Cola, which means he was a very early shareholder of Coca-Cola. He got in at a very, very low price. Turns out he was a very, very wealthy person. He was a huge philanthropist. In fact, he graduated, I think, from Emory University Law School, and the law school is named after him. So a very important person in the secular world, but also in the Jewish community in Atlanta, Georgia. So Rav Tuvia Geffen gets to know Mr. Harold Hirsch, and he asked him, is there any way for him to be able to, give him a behind the scenes of what's going on so he can get back to all the Rabbanim and tell them whether Coca-Cola is kosher or not kosher. To make a long story short, which we already did, he was initially shut down. Eventually, he was told he can get in. And when he finally got in and was given access to the ingredients, he discovered that, lo and behold, one of the ingredients that was being used was glycerol, or more popularly referred to as glycerin, which is an animal byproduct, which meant that there was a component of non-kosher meat that was inside the Coca-Cola. Rav Tuvia Geffen sat down, he wrote a tshuva, and he said that there's no question in the world, Coca-Cola is not kosher. Now, he bavarned. You're going to tell me, even though there's glycerin inside the Coca-Cola, but based on the information he was given, it was less than 1,000th of the total ingredients of what was inside the Coca-Cola. But based on a Rashba that the Shulchan Aruch brings in Hilchas Yain Nesach and Yeridei Siman Kuf Lamed Daled that says that although there's halacha bittul b'roiv and certainly bittul b'shishim, but at the same time, to the extent that there's an ingredient inside a taruvos that's darkei bekach, it's one of the predetermined ingredients, then there's no halacha of bittul. The Rashba was meichiach this from the sugya of Gvinas Akim, the topic of today's daf, by the way. But the point is, the Rashba, which is brought down in Shulchan Aruch, said that you don't say bittul to the extent that this davar muad is purposefully being put into this taruvas. And based on that, Rav Tuvia Geffen said that it's not going to be okay. We spoke a little bit about, so Rav Tuvia Geffen comes and he writes this tshuva and he says Coca-Cola b'asher Rosham is not fine, but there were Rabbanim that seemed to claim that it was kosher. Now, forget about did they have access, not have access. That's beyond the scope of this raid bite, and it's above my pay grade. For that, we'd have to have more historical knowledge in terms of knowing where exactly they were coming from when they went ahead and they said the Coca-Cola was kosher. But you have to assume they knew what was inside. And if they knew what was inside, and they knew there was glycerin inside, so based on that, how in the world could they have possibly said it's kosher? And you'll tell me because it's batel? No, it's not. The Rashba that's brought down in Shulchan Aruch says it's not okay. And that was really the second half of the Reidbai where we mentioned that it's based on a tshuva from the Noda B'Yehuda. This Noda B'Yehuda is in Yeridea, Madura Tinyana, it's in Simin Nun Vav, where the Moifes Adar, the Gadol Adar, the Poisek Adar, the Noda B'Yehuda said that lehalacha, we could be mekel delay Rashba, because really that Rashba is telling the sugya of Gvinas Akum, and the Rambam and the Rima Gash had a whole different mahalach how to learn the sugya of Gvinas Akum, and the Yehuda was meichiach that the Shulchan Aruch paskins actually not like the Rashba, but rather like the Rambam and the Rima Gash, and he said kedaihem harambam v'Rima Gash lismoich aleim. There's no question in the world you don't have to be machmir like this Rashba. Now the Yehuda was obviously not talking about Coca-Cola, because Coca-Cola is America's pastime, but Yehuda is writing his tshuva in 18th century Moravia. Yehuda was talking about a drink that we probably should not drink, which is called Krambabui Fereski, which was similar to Coca-Cola in that there was a little bit of nevela inside. Sounds like they might have been mechavan to Coca-Cola's secret recipe centuries earlier. But the point is that there too, there was a very, very similar shaila, and Rabbi Yehuda was matel lechatchila to go ahead and drink it. Now, we talked about, at the end of the day, it wasn't Reb Tuvia Geffen, right? The Shulchan Aruch paskins the Rashba. How could the Rabbi Yehuda say a shtickle Torah to Shulchan Aruch? Doesn't paskin the Rashba, and if anything, isn't it a stira? We spoke out from Moshe in one of his sherry cask shuvas to the Gaivet of Elizabeth, Reb Pinchas Taitz, where you see from that exchange that Moshe was learning up in the Rabbi Yehuda davar nifla, and that is, the Rabbi Yehuda must have held that the Shulchan Aruch, although he brings the Rashba, he brought it in one place, in Kuf Lamed Daled in Hilchas Yayin Nesach, and the Yehuda was bothered that 50 simonim passed, and Shulchan Aruch didn't feel that it had to tell you this such basic halacha that to the extent that there's an ingredient, you don't say the halacha of bittul, you would think this would be in the psicha shir of bittul. How's it possible that it took 50 simonim for the Shulchan Aruch to bring it? And the Yehuda therefore held that it was pashat him that this is a halacha in Yayin Nesach, mitzad the chumr of Yayin Nesach, and Rav Moshe said, by the way, if that's the case today, you don't have to be machrim by Yayin Nesach, Kiyudua, the first Ramon Hilchas Yayin Nesach. But the bottom line is the poskim that came prior to Reb Tuvia Geffen, Ubesoichan, Reb Yaakov Bienenfeld Sr., were relying on this Tshuvas Noda B'Yehuda. Reb Tuvia Geffen in himself, in his Tshuva that we read from, addressed, he bavarned the Noda B'Yehuda. And he said, even though the Noda B'Yehuda, but the Shulchan Aruch brings the Rashba, Reb Tuvia Geffen was machmer. He didn't want to be soimach on this skula from the Noda B'Yehuda, and as a result, he came out, he said that Coca-Cola is a problem. The Ma'aser Jews continued to drink Coca-Cola. So we mentioned the rest of the story is that he used his clout, his protector, his relationship with Mr. Harold Hirsch to get Coca-Cola to change the ingredients, or at least to tweak the ingredients, and he got them to replace the animal glycerin with vegetable glycerin, which Kamufan completely avoided this issue, and this really was where Coca-Cola Part 1 concluded. But here's Part 2. And Be'ezer Hashem, there's going to be a Part 3 as well, maybe even a Part 4. And that is, it was a davar pashit throughout this discussion that glycerin is not kosher. And it makes sense that glycerin would be not kosher. It's an animal byproduct, and to the extent that the animal is not a kosher animal, it's pashit that it would be a problem. The sugi was, do you say bittul, do you not say bittul? Rashba, nish Rashba, Noda B'Yehuda. I don't want to be so mechan to Noda B'Yehuda. The Shulchan Aruch only brings the Hilchas Yayin Nesach, but this is all presupposing that I have a chefza of Isser, and the question is whether or not this Isser is batal, or whether this Isser is not batal. But the truth is, I think we have to take a step backwards. And we have to ask ourselves, should it be so pashit that glycerin is not kosher? Granted, glycerin from a non-kosher animal essentially is a chelek of a non-kosher animal. But the way that the glycerin is produced involves a very complex process, during which point it's going to go through a phase where seemingly it's not going to be roi lachila. You can't stick a fork and a knife in it and have it with a glass of wine. In fact, it's going to be processed with so many chemicals that you could almost make the argument that even though it's true it's part of an animal, but I don't know, this doesn't really look like a part of an animal. And does that impact halacha, or does that not impact halacha? Me'inyan le'inyan ba'osa inyan. There was a very, very hot, contested halachic debate. Maybe the greatest halachic debate in Jewish American history. Again, we're still in the spirit of 250. But this might be number one. It's for sure on Mount Rushmore, pun intended. And that is gelatin. Is gelatin kosher or is it not kosher? And by the way, we make this disclaimer a lot. Now we have to do it in neon lights. This is 100% not a halachic discussion. We know lahalacha kimu v'kiblu that gelatin is not kosher. That's not what this is about. But just from a historical perspective, gelatin. So what exactly is gelatin? So gelatin comes, most cases, from the bones or the skin of an animal, which means that if it's being produced by a non-kosher manufacturer, it's going to be coming from a non-kosher animal. It's actually worse than that. In more than most cases, it comes from a pig. Meaning, in most situations, gelatin comes from either pig skin or it comes from pig bones. And if that's the case, at first glance, you would think that gelatin should be dead on arrival. Stating that, similar to glycerin, gelatin goes through a tremendous evolutionary process where at the time that it's gelatin and it's being put into whatever product it is that it's being put into, it doesn't have a remez, ben benoy shel remez, to the chazer. It has no shaykhs to having split hooves or chewing its cud. At that point, it's a completely different item. And really, this halachic discussion, as it relates to glycerin, is a halachic discussion which relates to gelatin as well. From a historical perspective, gelatin was a much bigger topic than was glycerin. And the reason is because it was used much more popularly. Now, it's interesting, glycerin comes from animal fats. Gelatin comes from what's called collagen. It comes from the bone of the skin. It comes from the protein of the animal. So if you're a chemist, if you're a scientist, you would say, no, shaykhis, Beinenu, they're very, very similar. They both come from a non-kosher animal, but at the same time, by the time it'll make it into, your product or whatever it is, it's going to completely be altered. Additionally, the usage of glycerin was very different than the usage of gelatin. Glycerin is a moisturizer, also has a little bit of taste. So it'd be used in products that require some level of moisture, right? So for example, skin creams are going to very often have glycerin inside of them. Additionally, it's a low-fat sweetener. So a lot of the low-fat products have a little bit of glycerin inside of it. Gelatin is used, kishmoi kachi. It's used to create that jello feel. And really, the most hooded area where it was discussed back in the day in the United States of America was Jello was made from gelatin, right? Back in the day, before there were like 18-layer cakes, your mother served you Jello for dessert. I remember in yeshiva, that's what we used to have every single day, right? So Jello was once upon a time a very, very big deal. And the regular Jello that you would buy at a local supermarket was made from gelatin. And this was a big topic. Is gelatin kosher or is it not kosher? And really, it was put in a lot of different products. A lot of these gummy bears or jelly beans, Wrigley's gum, Kiyadua. But again, if you know, you know. But the bottom line is, it was a very, very popular item. And there was a big discussion whether or not gelatin is kosher or is not kosher. And really, it ties very much into the same exact style of glycerin. Is it kosher or is it not kosher? Now, just before we set this up, just to appreciate a little bit better, in terms of how exactly gelatin is made. So, here we go. We can focus on glycerin. We can focus on gelatin. Glycerin is more negeya, the sugi of Coca-Cola, but really the chuvas and everything that was ever written on it was written primarily on gelatin, less so on glycerin. So I think we're going to focus on glycerin, on gelatin, with an understanding that it's all me'inyan le'inyan ba'osein. So again, the basic process of gelatin, the preparation, that's the first thing. So you need the raw materials, which are the hides, the bones, and the skins. They're all cleaned of fat and all the non-collagen material. The next thing that's done is what's referred to as the pre-treatment. The material is soaked in either an acid or an alkaline/lime solution to break down the collagen structure and loosen it from the other tissue. The third thing that's done is there's an extraction process. The treated material is repeatedly washed and then heated in hot water. This hydrolyzes the collagen into soluble gelatin, extracted in multiple batches at increasing temperatures. The fourth thing is filtration and purification. The extracted liquid is filtered, deionized, and clarified to remove impurities. Finally, there's a concentration and a drying process. The gelatin solution is concentrated, meaning evaporated, then cooled to a gel, extruded into strands or sheets and dried. The dried gelatin is then ground into granules of powder for sale. The bottom line is, from the time that it leaves the bones of the chazer until it makes it into jello, it's had a long day. It's gone through a lot. It has to bench a goimel 15 times, right? So it definitely goes through this incredible chemical process. And here's the question. The question is, does that change anything lahalacha, or does that not change anything lahalacha? That will be the topic, be'ezah Hashem, of this next year. Now, like all good halachic controversies, they begin how? With a tshuva from the Noda B'Yehuda. So the Noda B'Yehuda, in a tshuva, and this is in Madura Kama, it's in Yeridei Simin Chavav, he was asked the question about the shalfuchis of a dag tameh that was being put into certain mashka. Is it okay or is it not okay? So the shalfuchis of a fish is the swim bladder of a fish. It's an organ of a fish. And apparently, there was a certain mashka, the mashka of med, also known as mead. So this was a honey-based mashka. It had an alcoholic kick to it. And it seems that the makers of it would take the shalfuchis, the swim bladder of this non-kosher fish, and they would put it inside. The reason they put it inside was not to give taste, but it seems it had the ability to just clarify, just to make the liquid a little bit more clear. So this liquid, because it had honey inside, there was a lot of shmarm, there was a lot of sediment. It doesn't look so nice if you're going to drink it that way. So if you want it to look like a nice clear liquid, so they would add this shalfuchis, they would put it inside, and that would go ahead and clarify it. And the question that was asked to the Noda B'Yehuda was, is it okay for a yid to drink it, or is it not okay for a yid to drink it? Now, at first glance, you'll tell me it should be tali, and whether there's bittul, there's not bittul. Assuming there's a bittul, and based on that, you can argue that maybe it'll be okay, but there was a follow-up question, and that is, the halach is aim of atlanis l'chatchila. So could a yid go ahead, and could a yid manufacture it? Could he produce this? Jews were making this. So could they go to the store, buy the shalfuchis, put it inside their made dvash, put it inside their meat, and go ahead and have this mashka? You'll tell me it's batal, very nice, but there's halacha, the raisa for sure, the rabbanon, aim of atlanis l'chatchila. And this is what was asked to the Noda B'Yehuda. This shalfuchis that's being put into this meat, is it okay, or is it not okay? So the Yehuda sat down, and he wrote a tshuva shehutzrich l'dayris. Now, Yehuda said as follows. At first glance, there seems to be a very obvious sushtal to this halacha. And that is in the Ramah, in Siman Pei Zayin, right in the beginning of Hilchos Basa V'chal. So the first Siman in Hilchos Basa V'chal was Siman Pei Zayin. This Ramah is in Sif Yud. Zok the Ramah, Oir HaKeva, the skin of the keva, the Oir HaKeva, featured very prominently in today's daf. L'famim moilchen oisei. There were times that it would be salted, umiyavshen oisei, and they would dry it, v'nasa ke'etz, to the point that it becomes like a shtick holz. It becomes so oisgetrickend, oisgewebt, that it literally becomes like a piece of wood. Umimalen oisei chalav, and there are people that would fill it up with milk. Is this okay or is it not okay? Could you take a keva, which is basar, but after you salted it and you dried it up, it's like an eitz ba'alma, could you fill it up with water and go ahead and eat this? Says the Rama mutter, you're allowed to. The me'achash and yavish, because being that it dries out, havi ka eitz ba'alma, it becomes like a piece of wood. There ain't boy lachluchas basar. There's no basar anymore. And if there's no basar anymore, paskin drama, at this point, this is something that's going to be okay. So it says the Noda B'Yehuda, but muscharishin, I think this is what it is. Because I did a little bit of inquiries, and it sounds like this shalfuchas, when they put it in, it's already dried out, and the Yehuda describes the process of how it's made, and it's literally like that oisgetrik in a keva. And just like the Ramah paskin that it's ke'etz ba'alma, doesn't have a din basar anymore, so the shalfuchas wouldn't have a din basar either. Stating that, said the Noda B'Yehuda, and you know, anytime you learn the Chuvas Noda B'Yehuda, there's always a great chap. So says the Noda B'Yehuda, the chap is right in the beginning. Says the Noda B'Yehuda, I think it's chaluk b'yasayt. You know what the chaluk is? The keva is kosher, right? The keva be'etzim is kosher. You're allowed to eat it. Narvas, after you go ahead and you mix it with chalav, that's when the isser comes about. To the extent that by the time you mixed it with the chalav, it was already ke'etz ba'alma, so then the Ramos paskin and said the Noda B'Yehuda that it can't be chal isser on a keva that right now is an eitz ba'alma. But the shalfuchas of the dag tameh, that that was born Aser, because it comes from a Dag Tameh. So over there, the Isser pre-existed the fact that it became the Eitz Ba'alma. Narvas, you want that now that it became an Eitz Ba'alma, the Isser should go away. Says the Noid B'Yehudi, you have no right from that Ramah. The Ramah is talking about a keva which is mutter. It only becomes Aser when it's inside with the Chalav. To the extent that it's Eitz Ba'alma at the time that it was inside with the Chalav, it could be Lo Yal Zen Nemar, the Isser Bas of a Chalav, because it's Eitz and Chalav. Eitz and Chalav can't become Aser. As opposed to the Shalfuchas of the Dag Tameh, over there it was born Isser. So the Isser existed literally Mitchilas Briyasai. What's the Shaila? Now that it became Keitz Ba'alma, maybe it's Paka the Isser. Says the Noid B'Yehudi, I can make a very strong argument that the Isser doesn't have an ability to be Paka. Either Ramah, the Ramah is saying that when it's Keitz Ba'alma, it can't become Aser. But to say that it should be Paka the Isser, that not. But the Noid B'Yehudi said, even though the Svara is a Klara Svara, but Lamaise need a back up to the Svara. Aviva the Ramah's paskening that once something is an Eitz Ba'alma, it can't become Aser. That means when it's Eitz Ba'alma, we don't look at it as Kefa, right? We don't look at it as Basar anymore. So I think the same thing maybe would be true. The Shalfuchas of the Dag Tameh, even though now and only now it's becoming Keitz Ba'alma, and Mitchilas Parasi it was already Aser B'Seder. When it was a Shalfuchas of a Dag Tameh, it was Aser, but now it's an Eitz Ba'alma. So if it's an Eitz Ba'alma, it shouldn't be Aser anymore. It says in Noid B'Yehudi that the Makar to my Chilik, the Makar to my Chilik is a Sugi Mesechtes Avodah Zarah, Daf Samach Zayin Amud Beis, which goes on to Daf Samach Ches and Aleph. And again, all these Gemaras that we're going to learn now are mamish yisoidi for everything that we've been learning the last couple of weeks. So we know that in the world, the Bas of Chalav and Taruvos, there's a Sugi of Nois and Tam Lefgam. Nois and Tam Lefgam. Is it mutter or is Nois and Tam Lefgam masa? The truth is, the origin to the Sugya of Nois and Tam Lefgam is a Braisa in Avodah Zarah Samach Zayin Amud Beis. Says the Braisa, Echon Nois and Tam Lefgam, ve'echon Nois and Tam Leshvach, asa div Rameir. Rameir says, if you have a chefza machalas asuras, and by the way, we're not talking about we have a kedera that has a little bit of a bliya and it's already yoser from 24 hours, and you want to know if it's Nois and Tam Lefgam, Nois and Tam Leshvach. We're discussing not the bliya, we're discussing the real thing. We're discussing we have a piece of flesh that right now just doesn't taste good. It smells, it's disgusting, nobody wants to eat it. Right now it's Nois and Tam Lefgam. So says Rameir, if you have machalas asura, such as nevela, I don't care if it's Nois and Tam Lefgam or if it's Nois and Tam Leshvach, the echad aser, it's going to be aser. Rav Shimon says, l'shvach aser lefgam mutter. If it's Nois and Tam Leshvach, it's going to be aser. If it's Nois and Tam Lefgam, at that point it's going to be mutter. So Rav Shimon is the one in this sugya that holds, as it relates to a shtick flesh, that's Nois and Tam Lefgam, it's going to be mutter. Rameir says, echad Nois and Tam Leshvach, that's Nois and Tam Lefgam, either way, it's going to be aser. So I'm skipping a little bit. Says the Gemara, Rav Shimon my time. What's Pshan and Rav Shimon that holds that Nois and Tam Lefgam is mutter? The Tanya, based on the following brayso, so it says in the Torah, Lo yisoichlu kol nevela. What do you do with the nevela? Lager asher b'sharecha titneno va'achala. Says the brayso, kol aruya lager. Anytime I have nevela, that I can be mekayim what the Torah said you're supposed to do with the nevela, and that is give it to the ger. So if it's something that's roy to the ger, kruy nevela, that's going to be considered a nevela. She'en roy leger and kruy nevela. Nois and Tam Lefgam means not just it doesn't taste so geshmak. It's einay ru'uy leger. If it's einay ru'uy leger, it says Reb Shimon Abba Mefurish Drasha, it's going to be mutter. So the Gemara Rameir. What does Rameir do with that? Rameir holds Nois and Tam Lefgam is also just like Nois and Tam Leshvach. I have a drasha. Ahulim mute srucha meikar. That's coming to be memayed in the event that this nevela was always saruach. So at the time that it became nevela, it was already disgusting, nobody was going to eat it. In that case, I'm asking there's a drasha of leisleichlu kol nevela, leger shebesh arecha kol aruya, leger krui nevela, v'she'en ruya, leger ena krui nevela. But to the extent that it started off good and only later it became pagum, at that point it's going to be different. In other words, there's a machlekes Rameir and Reb Shimon, which after further review is a case where you have something, machalas asuras, nevela, let's keep it simple, which was a perfect nevela, was a good piece of meat, and then something happened, it became saruch afterwards. Right now, it's Nois and Tam Lefgam. You're allowed to eat it or you're not allowed to eat it. Reb Shimon says you're allowed to eat it. Because Reb Shimon holds right now, you can't give it to the ger, it doesn't have the Issa Nevela. Rameir says no. In this situation, being that it was once okay, so now you want to go ahead and now you want to be materit, the fact that it's not Ruya Leger doesn't have the ability to be materit. Now, if it was Saruach Meikara, if it started off already bad, so in that situation, Anachinami. But as it relates to a situation where it started off good and then it was Sriach afterwards, says Rameir, B'chaygav, Echon Nois and Tam L'Shvach, Echon Nois and Tam L'Fgam, it's going to be us. Says the Noid B'Yehudi, if you take a look at the Rambam, and really if you go through the Sugya, there's no hachra, whether we passing like Reb Meir or Reb Shimon, as it relates to the shaila. Where you have something that is non-kosher, it started off being roi lachila, and then only later it became any roi lachila. Is it going to be mutter kashitas Reb Shimon, or is it going to be also kashitas Reb Meir? The Gemara is not machriya. The Rambam in the Yad Chazaka doesn't have a sif, where the Rambam tells you mefurish what it's going to be. So if that's the case, says the Noid Behuda, we're muchrach to try to figure out on our own what the halach is. So what do you do in Klali Apsak if there's a machlokes Reb Meir and Reb Shimon? Says the Noid Behuda, it's a mefurish Gemara. It's a Gemara in Eruvin Daf Mevava Mebez. The Gemara says that if there's ever machlokes Reb Meir and his Bal Plukta, we don't pass him like Reb Meir. If there's ever machlokes Reb Shimon and his Bal Plukta, we don't pass him like Reb Shimon, right? Reb Meir and Reb Shimon, it's tough because they were so great, as we've spoken about over the years, that kemat, in all cases, ain't halacha kemoisa. Says the Gemara, Ibaylahu, Reb Meir Reb Shimon, halacha k'divrei mi. What do you do if there's a machlokes Reb Meir Reb Shimon? And the Gemara says, Teku, Tishbi, Yataris, Kushis, V'Yibayis. For this, you're going to have to wait for Eliyahu Tishbi to come. Says the Noid Yehuda, so now what do? I mean, up his encroachment till Eliyahu Navi shows up. So what are you supposed to do? Is halacha like Reb Meir? Is halacha Reb Shimon? So says the Noid Yehuda, he brings from one of the Kadmoinim that said that in a situation like this, halacha k'divrei ha-machmer. So if Reb Meir is the machmer, you're going to go like Reb Meir. And if Reb Shimon's the machmer, you're going to go like Reb Shimon. Now, in this sugya, who's the machmer? Reb Meir is the machmer. So if that's the case, says the Noid Behuda, the way I'm walking away from Avodah Zarah Samech Zayin Samech Ches is the halacha has to be like Reb Meir. That to the extent you have food that was roi lachila, and then it became any roi lachila, became nois and tam lefkam, not tzurach mikar. Where it happened later, Reb Meir is machmer, echen nois and tam lefkam, ve'echen nois and tam leshvach. Reb Shimon's mekel, halacha k'divrei ha-machmer. So what would be the halacha as it relates to nois and tam lefkam? If it starts off nois and tam lefkam, betchilas briyas ha'isser, then al zen nema the drosh lo yisaychul kol nevela ger shabbat sharech kol real ger kri nevela v'she ein real ger and kri nevela. If however it started off good and it only became later, for that you don't have the drosh. It's a machlokes Reb Meir, but we pass like Reb Meir, and it's for that reason. In that situation, the halach is it's going to be us. But the Yehuda went weiter. He said that the emes is, I don't think you only have to say that the halach is like Reb Meir based on Eruvin Memvav Teku when there's a machlokes Reb Meir Reb Shimon v'halach k'divrei ha-machmer. Because the emes is another sugya in Shas, says the Noid Yehuda, which l'chura is mamish talui in this sugya right here. That other sugya is a Mesachtes Bechayres, Daf Chof Gimel Amud Beis. The sugya over there is discussing the tumah chamura of nevela. So we know nevela is mitama, tumah chamura. It's not only mitama b'maga, but it's mitama b'masa as well. And the Gemara brings that there was a machlokes between Bar Pada and Rabbi Yochanan. In the event that you have nevela, that's einei ruya la'achilas ger, is it going to be considered a nevela that it should be mitama b'masa, the tumah chamura, or is it not considered nevela because it's einei ruya la'achilas ger, and as a result, it's not going to be able to be mitama b'masa? In that sugya, Rabbi Yochanan holds that if I have nevela that's einei ruya la'achilas ger, I don't care. It's still metama b'masa. Bar Pada says no. Tumah chamura ad leger, that it has to be ruya la'achilas ger in order for it to be metama tumah chamura. Tumah kala, tumah smaga, that it would be able to be metama. You go through the Gemara inside, the Gemara says, my time of the Rabbi Yochanan, what's Pshat in Rabbi Yochanan? Why does Rabbi Yochanan hold that, my time at the Bar Pada, what's Pshat in Bar Pada? The Bar Pada holds that if you would have a nevela that's not roi la'achilas ger, at that point it's not going to be metama tumah chamura. Says the Gemara d'chsev, lo yisaychlu kol nevela lager hashem b'sharechtet nela v'achol harui lager kri nevela v'she'enu rui lager enu kri nevela, because the only time something is considered nevela l'inyan tumah, that's the sugi over here, is only if it's roi la'achilas ger. If it's not roi la'achilas ger, it's not called nevela. Good, it's still tamei, but the tumah chamura it's not going to have. The Idach says, what was Rabbi Yochanan hold? Lamutei hecha desricha meikara. I know this as adrasha, but it's lamutei hecha desricha meikara. This sugya of B'chayres Chav Gimel that's discussing tumah chamura of nevela zok tonight is the identical sugya that you have in Avodah Zarah Samech Zayin Samech Ches. What's the difference? In Avodah Zarah Samech Zayin Samech Ches we're discussing achilas nevela, and in B'chayres we're discussing tumas nevela. But the Svaras HaMachlokes is identical. Now I know, because in both sugyas the Gemara tells you what the Svaras HaMachlokes is. And the shaila is how you darshan lo yisaychel kol negela l'ger hashem b'sharechtet nena v'acholo. Do you say it's true only for srucha meikara, or do you say it's true anytime that it's a sriach? And in both cases, And in both sugyas, that's exactly what's going on. So it says the Noida Yehuda, it's pasha to me that the machlokes bar Pada and Rabbi Yochanan in Bechiris Chav Gimel is the same exact machlokes as the machlokes Reb Meir and Reb Shimon in the Seif Avodah Zarah. And if that's the case, Bar Pada, who is Mekel, in the event that it's lois and tam lefgam, it's any roy lachilas ger. Even if it wasn't srucha meikara in bechiris chav gimel, he's going b'shitas Reb Shimon in avodah zarah samach zayin samach ches, who is meikol when it comes to achilas nevelo, to the extent that it only was his shriach later, because right now it's any roy lachilas ger. It's not lois and tam lefgam, and it's again basically lois seichel kol nevelo ger. I don't care if it was yesterday or today. At the end of the day, right now it's not roy lachilas ger, so it's not roy lachila shitas Reb Shimon, and there's not going to be metam either. That's going to be shitas bar Pada. But if that's the case, Rabbi Yochanan in the sugya b'chayres chav gimel on the base, who's chaylik with bar Pada, is mamash shitas Rab Meir in the sugya avodah zarah. And just like Rab Meir said in Avodah Zarah that Echon Nois and Tam Lefgam ve'Echon Nois and Tam Leshvach, unless it's Srucha Meikara. In the same vein, Rabbi Yochanan is saying the same exact thing, and he's saying Echon Nois and Tam Lefgam ve'Echon Nois and Tam Leshvach as it relates to the Tumah Chamura of Tumas Avelo, unless it was Srucha Meikara. So it says in Rabbi Yehuda half of a fella in the sugya in Avodah Zarah, there was Takino Hachro, whether the halacha is like Reb Shimon, the halacha is like Reb Meir. So for that we had to come on to Eruvim involved in the days halacha Kedevrei HaMachmer. Aber sagt the Noida Yehuda, ich habe a zweite Sugya. I have a Sugya in Bechiris Chav Gimel. And in the Sugya Bechiris Chav Gimel, I have a Machlokes Bar Pada and Rabbi Yochanan in the same exact Shiloh. And it's pasha to me, it's the same Sugya. Oh, if that's the case, now it got easy. Because what do you do in Halach if there's Machlokes Bar Pada and Rabbi Yochanan? What do you do in Halach if there's Machlokes anybody and Rabbi Yochanan? The Halach is like Rabbi Yochanan. So it's pasha that Halach is like Rabbi Yochanan in Bechiris Chav Gimel on base. And by the way, if you take a look at the Rambam, says in Yehuda Perakal of Hilchas Avos Atuma, he paskins Bok Tzeinu Shittas Rabbi Yochanan. So if that's the case, if the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan in Bechiris Chav Gimel, that means the halacha is like Rabbi Meir in the Sugyas and Avodah Zarah. And if that's the case, said the Noida Yehuda, it's pasha to me, lehalacha, that when it comes to the sugya of macholos asuros, but right now it's not roy lachilas ger. Right now nobody would put this in his mouth. It's pasha physically, b'mitzias, balabatish, not Roy Lachila. What's the halacha? Well, it depends. If it was not Roy Lachila at the time that it was becoming Aser, Srucha Meikara, I have a drasha, Seichel Kol Nevelo, Lagera Shebesharechet, Nadavachala. If, however, it was Aser, but afterwards it was his Sricha, over there the halacha is like Reb Meir, which is really Shittas Rabbi Yochanan, over there the halacha is going to be that at that point, it is going to be Aser B'Achila. Said the Noida Yehuda. To me, I think it's pasha that when the Ramah said that if you have this keva that started off as a keva and then it got oisgetricken because it was gesalzen, whatever exactly happened to it, and right now it's ke'etz ba'alma. Says Ramah, you want to eat it together with chalav, there's no iser basav chalav. That's because when the keva becomes ke'etz ba'alma, it's einay roy lachilas ger, and being that the Isser Keva only happens when it's Nisarif together with the Chalav. So if it's Nisarif together with the Chalav at a time that it's Ein Roy Lachila, it's the Srucha Meikara. And B'chai Gavna, the halacha is, Shitas Rameir, everybody agrees to this, Nois and Tam Lefgam is going to be mutter. However, as it relates to the Shalfuchis of this Dag Tameh, that's already different. Because the Shalfuchis of the Dag Tameh, before it became Ke'etz Ba'almi, before it was being processed to use with this meat, at that point it was already Yasser. So now you're dealing with a situation that was not his Sricha Meikara, something that was good, and then later was Saruach. Well, there too, the halacha is like Reb Meir. You're not going to say Nois and Tam Lefgam. Al Zen Nemar Echad Nois and Tam Lefgam ve'Echad Nois and Tam Leshvach. It's for that reason it's going to be Aser. Said the Neit Yehuda, that's where I'm coming from. I'm not just saying a Sfar Ba'alma. I'm coming literally from the Sugyas Alei. By the way, this is the first page of a 10-page Tshuvas Noida Yehuda. It's not normal when you sit down and go through Tshuvas Noida Yehuda a little bit, what's going on there. It's Pasha Nish Tzagloibin in the Vel. But this is the beginning of Tshuvas Noida Yehuda, and this was the psak of the Noida Yehuda. He said that it's true there's a Ramah. The Ramah already told us, he was megalit us this idea, that if you have food that is problematic from a kashrus perspective, and now it's ke'etz ba'alma, it's any roy lachilas ger, it's mutter, but stating that based on the way the Noida Yehuda understood the sugin avodah zarah, the sugin b'chayres, it's only going to be true as it relates to in that state it can't become aser. But if it was aser, now that it's in that state, that iser is not going to be okay. It's interesting. This Tshuvas Noida Yehuda goes down as a controversial Chuvas Noida B'Yehuda. Usually it's the Kula of the Noida B'Yehuda that we're having this conversation about. Oh, here's the Chumrah of the Noida B'Yehuda. The Pesachei Tshuva read in Siman Pei Zayin on this Ramah quotes the Noida B'Yehuda very bekitzer. He says, I am the Noida B'Yehuda that made this distinction. And then he quotes from one of the Kadmoinim, the Teferes Tzvi, who already was Ma'oyer the Loika Noida B'Yehuda. But the truth is, it wasn't just the Teferes Tzvi. If you look at the Poskim Kemat Kulon, Ke'ish Echad B'Lev Echad, were very, very troubled by this Noida B'Yehuda. And the reason they were troubled was for many, many reasons. Number one, the Noida B'Yehuda named on that as it relates to this machlokes between Rameh and Reb Shimon, there's no hachra in the sugya, right? The Rambam didn't paskin, the sugya didn't paskin. You left with the teku of Erevim and Vavam Beis. So Noida B'Yehuda with this charifish tells to another sugya in Bechayres. There we have a hachra, sayin the sugya and sayin the Rambam. And like this, Bazev Gilal Zeh, we know how to paskin, and that's his chilik in this Ramah. Dvarim neflam ad l'ma'od. Stating that, Zogen the Gedolei Achroinim, the Rebbe forgot a Magen Mishnah. The Rambam in Hilchis Macholos Asuros, this is Perik Beis, Halacha Chaf Aleph. So the Rambam over there is discussing a beria. So sometimes the halacha is, if somebody eats Macholos Asuros, even if it's Pachas Mikazayis, it's going to be a problem, to the extent that it's a full beria. Says the Rambam, coming in middle, Va'afilu Sarcha HaBeria, somebody has a barrier, and it was sarcha, it became disgusting. And the tzura of it changed. Even if you eat the entire thing, or because you ate the entire thing, you're going to get malchus. So the Rambam says if somebody eats a barrier, he gets malchus. And the Rambam adds, even if it was masriach and it was nishtanes, still the halach is, it's going to be asar. Says the Magen Mishnah. This Masha Kosev Rabbeinu, Afilu Sarcha Habriya, Hu Beshaloi Sarcha Vehevisha Ad Kidei Shleitei Roi LaAdam. It can't be talking about where it's at the point where it's not Roi LaAchilas Adam. Avalim Sarcha Kol Kach, because if it did become so disgusting that you can't give it to your neighbor the ger, Kvar Bir Rabbeinu Beperik Arba Asra Alach Yudaf. The Ram already told us in Perik Yudal Lachar of Aleph in Ilchas Macholos Asuris Shemisha Achal Oichel HaAser Acha shehisriach vehivish ubatel me'oichel adam hareze potter v'chenu the halacha ki Rab Shimon the Amar Avodah Zarah daf samiches nevela she'einu rui lager loishma nevela u'kumoshi is barashal. Says the Magen Mishnah, the Rambam's telling you that if it's a sriach, it's still going to be a problem. Oh, you better be very careful. Read the not such fine print. Right, that's the Magen Mishnah's job, to put the fine print on the slide of the Rambam. So he says, let me tell you what you better know. That's only if it was hisrich a little bit. But if it was hisrich to the point that it's mamish disgusting, that it's einu roi lachila sager, at that point, avada gevis, this halach is not going to be true. You know why? Because the halach is like Reb Shimon. How do I know that the halach is like Shimon? The Rambam paskin like Reb Shimon. Where did he paskin that way? In Perik Yudal at Alach Yud Aleph. So what steht in Perik Yudal at Alach Yud Aleph? So the Rambam over there says as follows. The Rambam's talking about if somebody eats macholas asuros, but he eats it shaloi kederech hana. Rambam says as follows. Halacha yod. Kol oichlan asurim inay chayiv aleim at sheyoich loisam derech hana. All macholas asuros, you're only chayiv if you eat it derech hana. Chutz mi basa b'cholav v'kilei akerem v'shalei never ben achila. Right? Other hoitzi isra achilas and b'lashon acheres b'lashon bishul. And it's for that reason, in those situations, you're going to be awesome, even if you shloik derech hana, a very famous Rambam. We need the next halach. Halach yidal keitzad harei shehimchas hachelev v'gamoy. If somebody would take chelev and he would liquefy it, and then he would swallow it, and kishucham, and he did it when it was very hot, like he literally burnt his throat, or he ate the chelev raw, or he mixed it with like bitter things, and he put it in, even to yayin. This is what we need. Or he ate machalas asuris, and it's no longer roy lachilas adam. Hareze pater. The halach is going to be pater. Says the Magen Mishnah in Perik Beis halacha Chav Aleph that at first glance have a steer Rambam. In the halacha Aleph, as it relates to the beria, afilu sarcha beria v'nishtanes surasa. Still, you're going to get malchus. It's mefurish and Perik Yudal at Alach Yud Aleph not that way. Oishna achal oichel aser achash esriach v'hivish ubato me oichel adam hareze pater. So the Magen, there's only one way for me to understand this. One must be talking about a zal level of esriach, and the other one's a zal level of esriach. But from the fact that the Rambam in Perik Yud Aleph and Perik Yudal Alach Yud Aleph paskins that if somebody eats oichel that was his sriach, you're going to be potter. So you say, Marishit Rambam is Reb Shimon. The Rambam in Perek Beis must be talking about where it wasn't so disgusting. It's a Mefurish Magen Mishnah, who no one knew more about the Rambam than the Magen Mishnah, who learned up in the Rambam that the Rambam Shita is like who? The Rambam Shita is Reb Shimon. So if Yehuda sat down, he learned the Sugin Avodah Zarah, and he said, there's no Hachra, I know halach like Reb Shimon. So he had to jump to Erev and Memvav, halach like Kedevrei HaMachmer, he had to fly to Bechiris Chav Gimel. It's a Mefurish Rambam, or at the very least, it's a Mefurish Rambam Magid. Echon and Arishonim learning up the Rambam Azai. So all the Achreirim, the Matmi on the Noida B'Yehuda, how could the Noida B'Yehuda have written a 15-page tshuva and not even mention this Rav Magid? It's a Pelat Suma on the Noida B'Yehuda. But the bottom line is, the Shitz Rambam, for sure the way the Magen Mishnah understood it seems to be, that the halacha is like Reb Shimon. That once Oichel is not Roi Lachilas Adam, I don't care if it was not Roi Lachilas Adam at the time that the Issa wanted to be Chal, or if the Issa was Chal and then only later it became Eini Roi Lachilas Nadam. In either case, the halach is going to be the same. The halach is that it's going to be mutter. The truth is, if you look in the Rishonim, the Rashba, in Teres HaBayis, and this is in Teres HaBayis HaOrach, it's in Bayis Dalet Shar Aleph, and the Rosh, in Perek Beis and Masechta Avodah Zarah, it's in Simon Lamed Dal. They both pass in Klora Reid, like Reb Shimon. And again, the Noida B'Yehuda, for whatever reason in his tshuva, he failed to mention the Rashba, and he failed to mention this Rosh. Now the Emes says, Noida B'Yehuda has a stark kasha, because Noida B'Yehuda is timing that even if there's no Hachra and Avodah Zarah, but there's Hachra from Masechtas Bechiris. So what are you going to do? So the truth is, Tosfos already addresses this kasha in Bechiris Chav Gimel, and Tosfos already says that it's not muchach that the two sugis are totally zeh, because it's very yitachin that there's a chiluk between Issa Tumma versus Macholis Asuras. And it could be a Macholis Asuras, there's one way of looking at it, and as it relates to Tumma, there's another way of looking at it. But the point is, the Rishonim already made that distinction. And that's the chiluk, how it's possible that the Rambam in Perek Aleph Hilchas Avos HaTumma would paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, yet in the sheet of the Magen Mishnah, in Hilchas Macholis Asuras, in Perek Yudalid, he would paskin like Rabbi Shimon. And that would stem how the Rashba and the Rosh, and by the way, other Rishonim as well, would have the places, they would have the right to go ahead and they would be able to paskin like Reb Shimon in the sugya of Avodah Zarah, even though it's poshut, Kol Bar Das understands that in the sugya Bechiris, the halacha is going to be like Rabbi Yochanan. It's not a stira, because it could be Isra Chila L'chud and Isra Tumah L'chud. But the bottom line is that this Noida B'Yehuda, this epic tshuva of the Noida B'Yehuda, really, in the world of the Achronim, was very, very mechudishtik, because the B'Yehuda almost felt this urge to reinvent the wheel and come up with a psak. How are you going to treat this machlokes Rameh and Reb Shimon? It's enough in a Magen Mishnah. It's a Rashba, it's a Rosh. I mean, these are literally the Rebbes of Klal Yisrael, the Poskim of Klal Yisrael. And if that's the case, we already have a Mefurish Psak. And the Psak seems to be that the halacha is like Reb Shimon. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who we'll get to more in the course of these next few raid bites, has a very important shuva on this whole topic. And this is in Yabia Omer. It's in Chelik Ches Yeridei Siman Yud Aleph. He has literally 4 pages dedicated to all the Rishonim and Achronim, where it's Mavur, the Loika Noida B'Yehuda. And he brings from the Shvus Yaakov, from the Chida, the Marsham, Reb Chaim Oizer, they all named on for a davar pashet, that as much as the Noida B'Yehuda, certainly in this Chabur, but really in Klal Yisrael, is Nevuah shehutzrach l'dairis. Every tshuva that he wrote is fire and kvar hoyer zakin, and how could anybody go kineged a Noida B'Yehuda? But the Pesachei Tshuva already was meramis to it, and if you go through Chacham Ovadia's Arichas Advarim, you'll see that the Gedolei Achronim all named on not like this Noida B'Yehuda. This Noida B'Yehuda, again, not all, but it became a tshuva that even people that would say, how could you be mekel the Loika Noida B'Yehuda? But the evidence, not like the Noida B'Yehuda, is so compelling. There's often a Rishonim, the Rambam, the Rashba, and the Rosh Beroshim that seem to be not that way. And if that's the case, a lot of poskim held that whenever you pose with such a question, the halacha is going to be that we're mekel. That if you have food of machalos asuras, even if it was once roy lachila, but if right now it's einay roy lachilas ger, right now la halacha we're going to say that it's einay roy lachilas ger, lo yishma nevela, and if that's the case, it's no longer going to be considered machalos asuras, which would mean that in the case of the Noida B'Yehuda with the shalfuchas, in that situation over there, there'd be makim lahakil, and any situation that's similar, where you're dealing with Michael in front of you, which you know originated from a davar asur, and at one point it was a regular viable issue where if somebody would eat from it, he would get lashes. But if right now it's in roy lachilas ger, there's a tremendous Makar in the Rishonim, and certainly in the Achronim, and even Achronim to say that we're going to go Lakula, even though the Nabida wrote a tshuva not that way, but at the end of the day, the Nabida's tshuva goes down as a little bit of a Tamua Diga tshuva, and therefore a lot of Achronim nem done 100% Lahakam. But there's another Nakuda that needs to be addressed as relates to this topic, much shorter, but very, very important and integral to this discussion. And that is the Rosh in Mesechtes Brachos, in Perakeitzim Avarchim, and this is in Siman Lamed Hey. He brings a psak from Rabbeinu Yoina. So talk about early Rishonim. He brings a psak from Rabbeinu Yoina. Rabbeinu Yoina was discussing something called musk. So what exactly is musk? Musk was something that was a byproduct of a deer. If you look it up, the musk deer. It came from the blood of the deer, and it was processed to the point where it was, in some cases, used as a food ingredient. People would eat musk together with other food, and it was used as a fragrance as well. Ever hear the expression, a musky odor, right? Certain colognes have musky odors. This is where it comes from. It comes from the musk. But the point is that, and this was something that was very popularly used in the times of the Rishonim. And Rabbeinu Yoina sat down and he had to issue a psak. Is a Jew allowed to eat musk, or is he not allowed to eat musk? Now, what would be the tzad not? Because the deer, the musk deer, was a non-kosher deer. So at the end of the day, it comes from something that you're not allowed to eat. And if it comes from something you're not allowed to eat, it's not going to be okay. Said Rabbeinu Yoina, it's mutter. Mutter 100%, full stop. Mutter, he didn't say Bal Nefesh Yachmer. He said it's 100% going to be mutter. And the reason he said because let's be honest, by the time the dam converts to musk, it has no shaykhis to musk. And then he uttered the immortal words that we've all heard in halacha. And that is Panim Chadashos Coca. It's not the same thing. It's a new metzias. It's a new chefza. And if that's the case, who cares that once upon a time it was blood of a hersh? Right now, this second, it's a whole new thing. And this new thing, the Torah never answered. And Panim Chadashos Coca, Ben Yoina was mechadish that there's a musig where a person can distance himself so much from his origin that he has no yichus anymore. He has no shaykhis anymore. Literally, he's not connected. He has no relationship to where it is he came from anymore. There's such a mitzias. And musk was the example that Rabbeinu Yoina gave. But just to read one lashon Rabbeinu Yoina, he says, "Hachanami aval bishim etchila hayadam, aber kivan de yatzim iteres dam, baser hashta as linon." I look at aval bishim nice and tam l'shvach betavshel. Who cares? It's musk that's being nice and tam l'shvach. It's not a chefz of a chayat meya that's doing it. It's not dam, right? Which wouldn't even matter if it's tamei atar. But the bottom line is, it has nothing to do with those in Yonim. And said Rabbeinu Yoina, this is something that 100% is going to be mutter. And then he brought a raya. Rabbeinu Yoina's raya was because Rabbeinu Yoina said that it's pasha to me that if you would have a chaticha of isser that would fall into dvash, being that the dvash would literally consume the isser to the point that the isser would become a piece of dvash, it's pasha to me that if somebody would want to go ahead and eat the dvash, you'd be able to eat it. I don't care what's in there. I don't even care about bittul. That thing is gone. It's not chaticha sisser anymore. And if somebody would want to eat it. And said Rabbeinu Yoina, just like it's pasha if chaticha sisser would fall into dvash, you'd be able to eat the dvash. So if you want to eat the musk, you could eat the musk. After the Rosh brings Rabbeinu Yoina, he just fears ice with a few words. And he says, V'nireh deha afilu rayasai tzricha raya. That's what he says. He said, Rabbeinu Yoina had a raya. What's his raya? Because if chatichas is would fall into dvash. What kind of raya is that? I mean, who said that that's the case? So it says the Rosh, v'nireh deha afilu rayasai tzricha raya. If you take a look at the Pirush Madane Yontif, that was written by the Baal Tosfos Yontif over here on the Rosh. So the Madane Yontif says that I disagree. We know there's a cloud that when something happens it means that it has Minig Yisrael Torah, it has a real shayrish in halacha, and that's for sure Rabbeinu Yoina was coming from. So this idea that the Rosh machta vek the raya from Rabbeinu Yoina, it's not fair, because Yidden have always been makel in such an yonim, and if that's the case, I don't think the Rosh is right when he said Rabbeinu Yoina needed a raya, because Rabbeinu Yoina was coming from Maisim B'chol Yoim, Ma'am Adaber, and that is something that's very powerful when it comes to halacha, ayin sham. But the bottom line is, this is the psak, this is the chiddush of Rabbeinu Yoina. This Chiddush Rabbeinu Yonah was quoted by all the Gdolei HaPoskim. The Radvaz in the Tshuva, the Pri Chodesh Barichas, Bis Yosef in Erechaim Simon Tov Samech Zayin, Hilchas Pesach, the Taz over there in Tov Samech Zayin. I saw Rabbi Vad Yosef in that Tshuva, Abi Yoima says that even the Rosh in the Tshuva worked with this Rabbeinu Yonah. I mean, the Rosh never blatantly was chaylik with Rabbeinu Yonah. Even the Rosh himself worked with this. And the bottom line is, this is something that there's no question has Groisa places in halacha, and that is that there's a concept of Panim Chadashos Balkan. Now, just to clarify, how is this different than the first half of the Shmuz? How's this different than Nebi Yehuda? Right, it's two completely different things. Nebi Yehuda is talking about where I have nevela, but it's the kind of nevela that's getting sharan and mole. Nobody would eat it. It's not something that you would eat. So it's nevela, right? It's nevela. We're not debating whether it's nevela or not. But the question is, nevela, that's in roy lachila. That's the machlokes Rav Shimon Rameir, and that's the whole debate. Do we pass like Rav Shimon? Do we pass like Rameir? This is something else. What we're saying is not nevela. It's not because it's not roy lachila. That's a different sugya. This is much more than that. This is how Rameir would be moida too. Because over here what we're saying is it's panim chadashos bo kan mamish. That was the mitzias of the mas. That's what was going on over there. But either way, this is the Chiddush Rabbeinu Yonah. All right. So for the next part, you have to be sitting. Ready? You're sitting or you're standing? Hopefully sitting. This Rabbeinu Yonah comes up in another place, la halacha. I mean, this is mamish mind-boggling. It really is. If you misplain it for a minute, it's mamish mind-boggling. So we know that once upon a time we had Shemen HaMishcha. We also know that once upon a time we had the Ketores, the Yod Aleph Samimoni Ketores. So what was inside the Shemen HaMishcha? So it's Psukim, it's in Parshas Kisisa, it's in Perek Lamed, it's Pasuk HaBeis. Vayedaber Havaya El Moshe Leimar. Va'ato kach lecha besamim roish, morderar chamesh meos, v'kinmoin besen machtzisa chamishim u'masayim, u'knei voisem chamishim u'masayim, v'kida chamesh meos b'shekel HaKodesh v'shemen zayisen. So there were 5 ingredients in the Shemen HaMishcha. There was morderar, there was kinmon besem, there was knei boisem, there was kida, and then there was shemen zayis, and the Torah delineates exactly what the shiur more of each. What exactly is mar? Mar durar means it's the durar type of mar. But what exactly is mar? Right? What is the cheftz of mar? The truth is, mar was also in the Ketores. It's one of the Yud Aleph Samimoni Ketores. Mar uktziyah shebay l'sner. Right? Mar was in the Shemen HaMishcha. It was also in the Ketores. So what exactly is mar? If you take a look at the Ramban in his Pirush al Torah on the parsha of Shemen HaMishcha, hiskimu ha'mefarshim, says the Ramban. V'harav Moshe michlol. And included in the Mefarshim is the Rambam himself. Ki hamar hu anikra musk. You want to know what it is? It's musk. Where's this Rambam? This Rambam is in Hilchis Klei HaMikdash. It's in Perek Aleph, Halacha Gimel. Hamar, says the Rambam, hu hadam hatzorur b'chaya shebahoidu, this Indian chaya, hayudu alakol, shemispasmen by bnei adam b'chal makkah. So you want to know what mar is? Mar is musk. Then the Ramban brings that Ibn Ezra quotes this pshat, and he asked a whole bunch of kashas. One of the kashas that he asked is, V'acherim amru, echi kones b'ktores u'b'shemen ha'kodesh dam chayet mei. How in the world are you taking musk that comes from an unkosher animal, and you're putting it into the shemen HaKodesh, and you're putting it into the Ketores? What's going on over here? And the Ramban said, doesn't bother me so much. Gam zu eino kushya ki alachos ahu hanesaf b'miroi v'adam v'yazim men b'chaya ein by loitum of loimos. Ramban understood that the mus didn't come from the actual dam. It came from a certain lechos, like some pus, and therefore it's not really part of the chaya. It's perish ba'alma, like we saw in the sugyas, and it's for that reason it's not included in the machalos asuras. Then is this kasha that Ibn Ezra asks on these shittas, the Ravid in his asagas asks on the Rambam. So again, the Rambam says, Hamor hu adam atzor b'chaya shebahoidu. Hayudu al kol shem espasmoy b'nei adam b'chal makom. Omer Avam zok the Ravid, ein taiti mikabeles. He says, my brain can't process this. Sheyachnisu b'maisa hektish dam shum chaya ba'olam loy kolshken chaya tmeya. What in the world? So he says, I have a different pshat based on a pasuk of Shirashir and Parakeh, Basi Lagani Achoisi Kalo Arisi, and he goes in and he says the other pshat that the Ramban already brings in terms of Amoris. But the Rambam and the way the Ramban expresses Skimu HaMefarshim. This is the haskama of the Mefarshim. Ibn Ezra and Ravid notwithstanding. But this was the hiskimu HaMefarshim. V'arav Ramosha Michlalom, and the Ramban himself defends it, mamish tooth and nail, that in the Shemen HaMishcha, in the Ketores, there was this Indian of musk. But everybody was matmiyah. What's going on over here? How could it be? And the Ramban tried wiggling out in terms of the Metzias, but if you take a look at the Kesef Mishnah, the Beis Yosef, in his Pirush right on the Rambam, says the Kesef Mishnah, this that the Ravid said, Ein daitoi mekabela sheyikonis memaisa hakodesh dam shum chai v'kolshkin dam chai etmei yesh loimer shekivon shen nishtana mitzuras dam v'nase ka'afa ba'alma v'u boisim mariach reach tov b'yosa lama yigara. Who cares? Who cares from Vanitzer? Right now, it was Megayer. It completely changed its nature. And if right now it smells good, and it was something that, practically speaking, was very convenient and seemed very geschmack and matim to put into the Shemen HaMishcha, to put into the K'taris, why should that be a big deal? What's the svar of the Kesef Mishnah? It's Rabbeinu Yoina. So this svar of Rabbeinu Yoina, Chevra, it goes so right. It was in the Shemen HaMishcha, it was in the K'taris. You can't even say it out of your mouth almost. But it was in the Shemen HaMishcha, it was in the K'taris. And by the way, the Ravid says, I can't process this. And Evan Ezra said the same thing. Oh, but the Rishonim defended it, and it boils down to Rabbeinu Yoina. In other words, there's this unbelievable chiddush in Rabbeinu Yoina, and that is that there's a musig in halacha of Panim Chadashos Bokan. And I don't care where this thing came from. If right now it's Panim Chadashos, this is going to change everything. At this point, it's going to be completely different. So let's go back to where we started. It's getting late early. And that is, so we set this up, talking about the history of the kashrus of Coca-Cola, specifically glycerin, which is one of the ingredients, which is an animal byproduct. And then we talked a little bit about gelatin, which is very much me'inyan le'inyan ba'isa inyan, which is also an animal byproduct. One comes from the fats, the other comes from the collagen, which is the protein. But same difference. You have now parts of a non-kosher animal. And how is halacha supposed to treat this? Really, at first glance, and this is the first shear as it relates to understanding the sugi of gelatin a little bit, there would be two svaras to throw out there to debate, and both of them would be muscharishan, having it a das, where if you wanted to be makel, you would have very, very much what to be saimachan. The first is, there's no question in the world that the gelatin and the glycerin, basher husham, is not roy lachilas adam. And if it's not roy lachilas adam, Al zen nem ashitas Rab Shimon, that that Allah is that once something's nice to Tam Lefkam, at that point it's going to be mutter. And even though it's a machlokes Rab Shimon Rab Meir, and even though the Noid Yehuda with his grace of koyach paskin lechumra, that when it comes to this machlokes Allah is like Rab Meir, but gedolei achroinam ubesoichem the Shvus Yaakov, ubesoichem the Chida, the Marsham, Reb Chaim Oizer, they all said that it can't be that this Noid Yehuda is so pashut, because the Rav Magid already said that the Shittas HaRambam is to be maker like Rab Shimon, and the Rashba said him a furish, and the Rosh said him a furish, and not just that, there's so many rayas seemingly at first glance, Ayin Sham Darichas of Chacham Avadia, the Loi Kanoid Behuda, and it's for that reason the halachic status of this glycerin and this gelatin, there would be starker mokum lahakel just based on the fact that Parasher Risham it's not Roy Lachilas. But there's another reason to be mekel, and that is Rabbeinu Yoina. Let's say we're going to nemon the sheet of the Noid Yehuda. Let's say we're going to be machman that Allah is like Rameh, because at the end of the day, Kfar Hoyer Zakin, and who has the places? Right, you can't be mekel like the Noid Yehuda in all these places, and then all of a sudden now when he says a chumrah, I'm going to be mekel like some of the other achrayim. No, we live and die with the Noid Yehuda, and if that's the case, so if the Noid Yehuda said it's chamer, it's chamer. But on top of that, you have Rabbeinu Yoina. You have Rabbeinu Yoina, Panim Chadashos Bokan. You're going to say, come on, you're going to take something that came from a chazer, chulila, and you're going to put it into your pride, you're going to put it into your mouth. They put it on the mizbeach. It wasn't a chazer. It was a chayat. They put it on the mizbeach. And you're right. The Ravid said, ain't daiti mikabelis. I can't fathom it. I'm asking. I can't either fathom it. But at the end of the day, it's what the Rambam says. And it's what the Ramban says was his scheme, kol ha-mefarshim. So at the end of the day, this was the mitzvah. And there's a musik of Panim Chadashos Bokan. There's a concept of bittul, right? The poskim say that if somebody doesn't want to rely on bittul, he's a koifer biker, because kulam meroy echad nitnu. And the same Torah that says like soichlu nevela says achi rabba ma'atlis. There's a musik, there's a halachic concept called, there is such a mitzvah, there's a real thing called panim chadashos ba'okan. Right, in the Svar Makdoshim, the Indian of bittul is to be miled in itzoitzes and to be able to play around with the klippos, because how else could you eat machal sasuras and maled in itzoitzes? It happens through bittul. So maybe this is the avoid over here. I'll pichsi this, the bnei soschas mayach in this kiddo. But the bottom line is two svaras to be makel. Number one, noniach, I see it as a piece of nevela. Noniach, I see it as a piece of chazer. But it's in lachilas adam. It's in lachilas adam. It's going to be mutter. Number two, it could be the chemical processing of it. It physically alters it to such a level that we're at a point where it's 100% Panim Chadashos Ba'okan. And being that it's Panim Chadashos Ba'okan, I can't even view it anymore as being the Isser, and if that's the case, that too would be a Svara to be Mekel. The bottom line is, 2 Svaras ostensibly to be Mekel. Now again, we can't do Raid Bite Part 2 without doing Raid Bite Part 3, because if we walk away from here, we're all going to be in a lot of trouble. So we're not stopping over here. This again is very much not Halacha L'Maisa. This is not the way the Gedolei Achronim came out. I hope I'm not spoiling it for anybody, but this is not the way the Gedolei Achronim came out. But I just want to end with one little twist, and that is, I was going through this tshuva from the Noda B'Yehuda about the shalfuchis of the Dag Tameh. And I just figured, I wonder what this fish even was, right? Al dvar hakruk, v'yesh koyin oisei hoizen balazen. Some people call it hoizen, or probably hausen balazen. So I looked it up, and I triangulated my information. I looked it up in multiple sources. You know what the hausen was? You ready? It was a sturgeon. That's what it was. The hausen was a sturgeon. Can you believe it? The bladder of the sturgeon. Reported al makula. So what's going on over here? It's a pella, right? So I remembered a few weeks ago, I got an email, and it came from someone who listens to the shir, who happens to be a very chashuv Talmid Chacham. He's a member of one of the big kashrus organizations in America. And he sent me an email very respectfully saying that we misspoke a little bit during the shir. Because if you remember, at the end of the sturgeon raid bite, I said, were it not for the fact that the Gedolim came out, not like the Chachmei Prague, not like the Noda B'Yehuda and Reb Shmuel Landau and Reb Elazar Flecklis, you'd be sitting at a Toyameh and you would say, pass the beluga caviar with the beluga vodka. So he wrote to me and he says, you have to be careful when you say something like that, because not all sturgeon was created equally. And even like the Noda B'Yehuda, the beluga caviar would still be not kosher. At the time, I didn't appreciate it, but I looked back up, I had a feeling this is where he was coming from. You know what his raya was? Take a look at Chuvas Noda B'Yehuda, Yoredei Madura Kama Simcha Vav. Because if you look it up, this hausen wasn't just any sturgeon. It was the beluga sturgeon. This is where he was coming from. So at the end of the day, we got to be careful. But not all sturgeon was created equally, even if you're going to be Soymech on the Noda B'Yehuda. That's why we put out the disclaimer, you ask your local rabbi. But I just thought, in a twist of irony, this Noda B'Yehuda is talking about sturgeon. Now, I know what Dailam was going to say. Maybe this is a ride that Yehuda was chayzer, right? Because you remember, that was the whole time that Yehuda was chayzer. But first, tshuva. Why is he writing about the shalfuchis of the bladder of the sturgeon? I thought the Yehuda holds its mutter. So maybe this is a raya that he was chayzer. But we know Reb Shmuel Landau, Reb Elazar Flecklis, the V'yotzon Zeh, Yotzar to L'sachik Boy. They didn't even want to hear it. It was, you talk about something she'in adas mekabelas. They couldn't hear this even for 1 second. The mahalach is because not all sturgeon, could it be that Yehuda didn't know it was a sturgeon? Who knows? Very fascinating, very interesting. But the bottom line is, this is a beluga sturgeon making its way into Coca-Cola together with gelatin. Ein große tarivas, one big sidus achashverish. But here's the bottom line. This is only part 2. Be'ezer Hashem. Tomorrow we are going to do a very important part 3.